Here we are in the ether realm of Gathertown, created by Eliza Grames for the RCN Insect Declines Conference. Travel with me across the main island with my avatar to the art gallery. And if we were to travel down this elevator, we'd be in last year's Ether Gallery, an exhibit space with multiple insect-themed artworks, many an artist. But today, it's all about the 2024 exhibit, which I plan to interview for. And there's our first, Lola Wegman.
Hi, my name is Lola Wegman. I work at the Museum of Jurassic Technology. I've been working in the archives of this man, um, Henry Dalton or Harold Dalton. He's proven to have a very confusing life. But basically, he was a microscopist in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And he made these microscopic mosaics out of butterfly scales and diatoms. And this was arranged slides were sort of becoming a big hobby and interest of the time. This was, the Victorian period. There's really this frenzy of the microscope, of the microscopic world, and as people were able to see, this completely unknown world, this a drop of water held a world of fantastical little creatures, and some were horrified that what they were drinking was full of beasts as they saw them, and some thought, oh my God, what else are we not seeing, And it was the first time the microscope was kind of affordable enough that people in their own homes, the general public, could have access to this world. Something that I love, just a little fact, is it was around this period fairies used to be thought of as like the size of a 6-year-old. And when microscopes became like this public spectacle, then suddenly fairies were the microscopic fairies we know today. So it was sort of this like complete door opening to this whole new universe that you couldn't see. And I love the parallel of the telescope sees out far and we see a world that we don't know, and the microscope sees up close to a world we don't know that's even closer. So this was a period where people would collect slides, they would display slides, in their after dinner salon. It was sort of like the new era of the cabinet of curiosity, where you could have this whole world, this like sublime experience at such a small scale now. And they called themselves amateur microscopists, but that was sort of encompassed a very wide range of people. It was someone who was, truly scientific with no formal training, but it was also people who just thought plants under the microscope were beautiful. And there were also these salon slides, which is what Dalton's would be, which were just beautiful things for amusement. Or you would have micro photography, or a prayer etched into glass that was a few micrometers big. So Dalton's slides, arranging slides was common of the period, but Dalton's slides are really like no other I've seen. He used butterfly scales, diatoms, and occasionally some beetle scales, and he arranged them using a single boar bristle. And there's no adhesive. They're actually adhered just when you press them down with the boar bristle. It releases the natural oils, and that adheres it into place. So, I mean, you can see they've never degraded, they've never yellowed like other mounting mediums do. And he was really the only person that I've seen that was able to be really three-dimensional in his work. He had this incredible scientific technique that, in my mind, rivaled any of the most famous scientific arrangers, any of this, and then totally connected with this artistic eye of depth. most arrangements were two-dimensional, and he overlaps these individual slides. If we go to this image over here
Yeah.
of the full slide, you can see there's just this breathtaking movement, I think, especially in the birds. He overlaps and he builds up the body of them. You know, he's cutting this tiny, tiny scales to make the shapes and the curvature of the wings. And I think one of the things that I noticed as I've been looking at these is he's turned diatoms. So diatoms are these single-celled algae organisms. They're encased in silica. So it's these little glass shells. And on this piece, they're lining the rim of the vase. And he's actually turned them in space to create perspective. So it's this, he is using perspective, you know, the perspective of the diatom in physical space, but he's creating this like illusory space by manipulating those. And I don't think I've found another example of someone turning a diatom in space to create any slide. And it was just this incredible technique. And then what I found in my research is I don't think that he had any scientific or artistic training. So it gets very complicated to tell his story because you kind of have two characters that appear. You have his friends who really the only thing written about him are obituaries by his friends. They knew him as Harold Dalton, the microscopist, who in his youth traveled Europe after studying science, sold his arranged slides as he kind of traveled between France and Italy and across the world. And then you find census records and you learn that he was born Henry, a different year than his friends thought he did. And he actually worked as a bank clerk for a lot of his life. And he worked as a bank clerk until he was about 36. And then suddenly the next year, you find his micromosaics being advertised in these scientific catalogs. So as far as I know, he just kind of miraculously appeared out of thin air. And in my mind, I think about it as just this like innate sensibility towards art and science that was in him and just sort of came out and transformed his life. And I think he left behind an identity that wasn't him and just became this like remarkable man of science. But in each slide you can see, so I think it might be helpful to go over to these images of the slides. So you can see the scale, that's a tiny slide. You just see some speckles in the center, and that in there under the microscope is a full bouquet of flowers. So some of them are chickens and roosters of, you know, depicting little chicks running after their moms. They all have such personality. And this, I love this, looking at his labels, because on the left that's handwritten by him. So each one has a small little description in his really spidery script, which I love. You can see he's now proclaimed himself Harold Dalton. He used to prepare in London and Paris. Those were the hubs of microscopy. He really lived across France, just in these small towns. And then if you go to the other slide, this slide case here, you see another slide label. He's etched with his little script as well, and there's a little rooster inside. And I think you can just see how like dear and sweet of a man he was, even just in the way that he writes. And then you get these different stories of him. Another story that I just love to tell is that I found articles of him in America, and they say that he was dead 30 years before he died, and that he was running from creditors, and he was kind of this degenerate, And in reality, he was this sweet man who's devoted to his wife and devoted to teaching others about microscopy. And he never really had any, or no one after him that kind of took up his style of work. And he became sort of lost in time, I think, despite how remarkable he was, both in art and science. He never considered his work scientific. For him, he called them scientific amusements. So I don't think he even knew how really unique and impressive what he was doing was. I think it was really just you can tell in his work he's having fun. If you look at this one, the butterfly over here, this is a close up of a slide. And every detail, I think, has so much life in it. Here's this one butterfly that he's made from, you can see the antenna are, I mean, just the most minuscule things. I just can't believe it every time I look at it. But he would create these little almost characters within, even though he would work on themes of bouquets of flowers, cornucopias of flowers, roosters and chickens.
Lola, the butterfly appears to be made of butterfly scales, but the antennae were really tricking me. So you see all these wonderful filamentous elements as stems in the plant on the left, and of course the antennae on the right. Any idea what those components consist of?
So this is when you read little short descriptions of what they're made out of, they say butterfly hairs.
Oh,
Which
okay.
was it you that I was talking about butterfly hairs?
Yeah, so because hairs technically only belong to mammals, their hair-like structures called setae or a seta singular on insects. And
So then there you go.
actually, technically, those butterfly wing scales are just highly modified hair-like structures or highly modified setae.
And I've learned so much about, let me see, I think this first one we were looking at, so he has so many diverse butterfly scales in this, and I've learned a lot about structural color because, unfortunately in the museum, some of them have faded, and you're left with these really gorgeous icy blue ones like this one here, and it's the structural color of butterfly scales. So instead of pigment, it's um, refracting light based on the actual physical makeup of the butterfly scale. So you're left with these icy blues and purples and yellows that will never fade. And I think he really had such an understanding of the properties of each scale. And he often included beetle scales, which you can see in the body of the vase. But he's adding these embellishments based on the properties of each item. So it's really this using his scientific knowledge to produce something so artistic. This one article called him the Raphael of microscopists, and I think that just sums it up. Yeah, I love this one. You can also see the wings of some of the butterflies are made from diatom and just that like transparent, that transparency. And then one of the birds, you have these translucent scales that create even more depth. It's just, yeah, such a deep understanding of both sensibilities. But yeah, let me know if you have any other questions, Barrett.
I have many.
Ask away. I love talking about Dalton.
Has anyone attempted to identify to genus or species a number of the insect component parts?
There's a girl who works in the museum with me who volunteers in the entomology lab at the Museum of Natural History, so I turn to her sometimes. But it's very hard to tell, and I would love to do that. I was looking into how he would have gotten access to these, and so collecting specimens, scientific specimens, really became a hobby, and people would collect butterflies, but sometimes butterflies become damaged. And what do you do with the damaged butterflies? And so Dalton had access to these damaged butterflies, which to him were material. So I think he had a huge range of butterfly scales. He mainly worked with these almond diatoms, and singling out a specific species of diatom is so unbelievably impressive. There was a very famous microscopist and scientific arranger named Moeller who isolated individual diatoms and arranged them into a grid of, I think his largest was like 4,000 diatoms. And here Dalton is also isolating, not just isolating, but turning them in space. Um, so it's, for me, it's one step more impressive than Moeller, but um, yeah, I'm not sure which ones they are. You would probably be more of an insight there than me.
And thank you for pointing out this three-dimensional turning in space of the diatoms around the vase top, because I hadn't actually paid attention to that, and I'm not sure how you can do that because he didn't use a slide with a dipped component, correct? It was all very flat, so this should be a relatively two-dimensional space, or was there flexibility within the slide medium that allowed that turning?
So you do have a few micrometers in depth. I think there was a limit to how much you could turn them in space. If you see, if you're looking at the full slide, you can see towards the edge of the ring, he transitions to actually a rod diatom. So he's sort of cheating his perspective as well. So I think it was only this slight turn, but that precision of being able to do that, and also remarkable how they really, I mean, this you see some beetle scale shifting, but they really haven't shifted in space, which I I cannot understand. The butterfly scales, it's the oils, but I've never seen otherwise a diatom mounted without something like Canada balsam from the time. So I don't understand what mystery that is, but maybe you do.
I do not. It'd be fun to talk to a Straminophile or diatom expert to find out.
I'll say
Maybe
I've
they
read some things that that small will stay in place, but I don't quite understand. Um, yeah, because how over 100 years and they're still here. I think maybe we'll go back to this slide right here,
Great.
because it kind of shows how little information we all have on Dalton. There's no there's no way to date his slides. There's no real way to tell when he started making them. He quite literally 1 year to the next goes from a bank clerk to a world-renowned microscopist. And the only information we really have that's concrete, because Jennifer, I was talking about before, his obituaries written by his friends are describe a completely different life than the census record showed. They thought he was traveling as a microscopist in his youth, studying science. No, he was a bank clerk until he was 36. The next year, he suddenly he talked about in scientific catalogs. 3 years later, he's internationally renowned. He's being brought to his slides are being brought to America. They're brought and sold. And the only way I've been able to track these things are the labels on his slides. And this green label is one of his own. It's what he used throughout, so that doesn't help date it. But other slide labels have been removed and people's personal labels have been put on. So I'll find labels of a dealer that was in London that would have been connected to him. And then it will be in a slide case of a dealer based in Philadelphia that was distributing slides from this dealer in London. So it's been this real like detective CSI work, but it's funny to be able to have researched something for 2 years and not be able to tell you a single date on any 22 slides that I've looked at. But yeah, it's kind of a delightful mystery, and I think he's all the more remarkable because of it.
It's amazing. And I have a lot of these Victorian microscope slides, so now I'm anxious to take a look at them.
Yeah, and these are really unusual for them. These were the salon slides, the slides that would just be sort of shown for amusement. But I really haven't shown or found any other slides that are arranged micromosaics that have the depth of Dalton, that do overlap the individual butterfly scales or incorporate butterfly scales and diatoms in the way that he does. I found some butterfly scales that are, will be a snowflake of flat scales arranged as in this geometric pattern, or diatoms arranged. They're almost always as a snowflake, unless they're sort of like a scientific grid. And here Dalton is completely, I think, pioneering this whole different direction of the field, which comes out of nowhere, and then after his death disappears, as does he.
There isn't much in the way of post-mortem records about his life.
Almost nothing. You have these obituaries, and there are very few articles online now and very little research besides one wonderful website, microscopist.net, which I love. But their records are based off of the obituaries, which one would think those would be accurate. So it makes sense, but you dive into a lot of the census records are French because he lived in France a lot, and you kind of, the more you pick apart, both the less he makes sense, but somehow he makes more sense when he's this quiet character who reinvented himself, and he didn't tell anyone of his past. The obituaries even say he never spoke of his past, but only of his work. So it's like he found this and he said, forget everything else. This is me now.
Wow. What were his dates again?
He worked from about 1872 to when he died in 1912. He was born in, his friends thought 1829, but he was born in 1836. So even he was born Henry Dalton. Once he becomes a microscopist, he becomes Harold Dalton and never looks back. So it's all of these little curiosities about him.
Lola, how many slides of Dalton's exist at the Museum of Jurassic Technology, and how many exist outside of the MJT?
We have 22 slides, which we got from this one man, Ken Fields, who did so much research in the 70s about Dalton, and he was sending, I have all of his letters that he wrote to people in Switzerland and France and this and that, and getting people to try and really appreciate Dalton, but with kind of remarkably little success. I would say no fault of his own, but you need to be able to see them to know how incredible they are. And he got them all from this one collector from the contemporary to Dalton. It's all this one man's collection, Hodges, who lived in Indianapolis. But I have found, so we have 22 slides at the museum from the original collection. And then I found a man who owned a few Daltons, and we purchased 2 from him. And he has, I believe, 2 more. But beyond that, you'll find some in auction houses in London, but very few, and a lot of them are not necessarily marked Dalton, but you can tell because you'll see part of his etching underneath the slide label that has been put on top, or part of the green label left over. So his name has really almost been erased. It's kind of crazy to me.
That leads me to my next big question. Because of the mystery, this gray zone, this gray area of how many he's produced, does that mean others followed in his footsteps or attempted to simulate his works with these micromosaics featuring butterfly scales and or diatoms?
I have found essentially nothing. There's this one micromosaic that kind of confuses me. It's of a crown, and it looks almost like a Dalton, but not quite the depth that he has. And it's not attributed, and that one sort of floats in my mind as maybe that's the only comparable one. There is a current artist, and he's inspired by Dalton, and he makes these sort of three-dimensional micro mosaics. But he actually uses like separates glass to create different layers to create dimension. So even his don't really use this like actual physical perspective to create illusory perspective, if that makes sense.
And he did this as his business. Do you know how much he would charge per slide? First off, any idea how long he would spend per slide and how much he would sell each slide for? And I imagine these were say elite collectors.
So he spent 10 days on each. It was only took that amount of time, which absolutely blows my mind. It was less than I would have thought for that time. I think it was like, oh goodness, I can't remember now. But yeah, a lot of times they would list a price. It would just be like, contact this and this for information. Or sometimes it will say, it won't say Dalton, but it will say butterfly scales and diatoms of bouquets of flowers and chickens and roosters. And you know that that's Dalton because that was sort of his trademark.
So if you, Jenny, or I were to attempt to create a Dalton type micro mosaic under the microscope, we would gravitate toward some kind of sterile environment with a hood but with very little airflow. So how did he avoid all of the dust and contamination that would ruin the image? And 11 days sounds like a short period of time, but it sounds like an eternity if you're trying to avoid all that contamination. Like what happens during the day and night around his precious mosaic? Because he didn't, or did he, cover it between episodes of creating the slide?
So that I'm not sure. I feel like he must have, yeah, because a heartbeat could disrupt the single bore bristle, you know, a breath, let alone a sneeze, and the whole thing is gone. I found one image of, it was marked as Dalton in his studio, but his studio, or I almost think that too is kind of incorrect because his studio just looks like his living room. And it's covered in pictures of his wife and, you know, also vases of flowers, which I love to think, oh, maybe he was sitting there looking at those and making his micro mosaic.
A very clean living room and studio.
It didn't even, there were it was a lot of clutter. So I almost, either he somehow worked like that or he just thought, this is where I want the picture and I'm going to say that it's my studio. I think so many people gravitate towards the flowers because they are stunning. But I think the level of detail and the amount that he can capture a living creature is completely mind-blowing to me. This like richness of color in the rooster, the different tones of, I don't even know what you call that on rooster, the red part. The way the feathers sit, he's, you know, mimicking feathers with something that are sort of like feathers. The butterfly scales to me sort of look like feathers. And then you have this iridescent tail, which the other thing about Dalton is they completely change as light moves. And I think he really had an understanding of that. And a lot of the butterfly scales are iridescent. And you can start to see that come out here. And then you'll change the angle of the light and it will go from this luminous thing to almost like it's in chiaroscuro. And it will bring out some scales become more transparent, like the chicken to the left has these very delicate scales. And you get these little one of the chicks even has an eyeball, you know, it's with these little butterfly hair feet. And I think just capturing spirit of an animal. You know, the rooster stands tall over all of these birds. The mother taking care of them and them sort of flocking around their family. And I think in one, yeah, in one little vignette, he captures every detail. And I think that's him. So it's just such an understanding of art and perspective and composition, and knowing how to use these, knowing his medium so well, knowing the properties of each butterfly scale, knowing his abilities with them. It's kind of these like, you need both to create something this beautiful. And then this next one to the left was actually the first micro mosaic I saw under the microscope. And I like just about cried when I saw this one because I think it is so poetic. You have these two birds looking up at each other and kind of meeting at this butterfly. And you see on the bird's wing, you see this one bird looking up into space at this perfect meeting point, and you feel this movement down of this swooping bird. And I don't know, just this, you can get lost in it as an image, and then you can start thinking about it from a, you know, scientific technique perspective, and then you get lost in that, how in the world did he do this? So it's sort of these two senses of awe for me, I would say. All right, and this next one to the left is, I'll just briefly touch on this because I feel like it's, you sort of get the same in the others, but this is a close-up of one of the bouquets. And you get just this like cacophony of colors and of, yeah, I don't know, I absolutely love these. The little iridescence showing through. You can see some of where he's pressed the boar bristles into place. You'll see these little indentations, so these little hand markings, and I feel like you can imagine him in his little, you know, be it living room or workshop, working away in there. And then this final one to the left is just, I don't know, I just wanted to include it because I think it's so beautiful. And I also think the scales he uses to create the grasses at the top is again really showing how purposeful he was with everything that he placed, and how, you know, much he knew his medium and how to work with it and make it work for him to create these things where you don't even, you at a certain point forget that they're made with not flower petals and not, I was going to say not butterflies, but they are actually made of butterflies. I kind of love that. I feel like it's a little joke on his part. Yeah, butterfly within butterfly.
And Lola, I think it's valuable to close on you because you've talked a lot about Harold Dalton and his work, but you're writing a book about him and you went to great lengths to photograph all the works that the Museum of Jurassic Technology holds of his. Do you want to make any last remarks about that process?
Yeah, I'm very grateful that the museum has kind of entrusted me with this project. I came in blind and was handed a briefcase of everything they had and said, go at it. And it's been 2 years, I would say, that I've spent researching Dalton. And I feel like I've gotten very close to him, and I'm very excited to write a book about him. Because I kind of want to let him exist in the world as the character that he is, and sort of do justice to him and let his story come out in both the way he would want it to and in reality. And yeah, a huge part of this project has been photographing these works. It's very difficult to photograph both something microscopic and something that is so dependent on light. because the question is, how do you choose which light you want to photograph it under? Because this image here would look completely different with the head-on light, or a light from the left side versus the right or the top. And I could spend 18 years photographing every detail I wanted to take of every image. But yeah, Barrett was actually quite helpful through that process. We were talking about stitching them together, which just completely brought them to life. And it really allowed the three-dimensional nature to come out, because I needed to be careful to, when trying to get good light, not to flatten everything. Because part of the wonder of them is when you're looking under the microscope, you can move the light and you can almost make them move themselves. You feel like they're dancing, or the butterflies are flapping, and you don't get that in the images, but I hope I somewhat captured that nuance.
Did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
And Lola, thank you so much for this tour.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you,
of
Barrett.
Virtual Realm in Gathertown. This will be a
Yeah.
lovely resource for people to view who haven't been able or weren't able. And with your permission, I'd like to post this for the world to view on YouTube, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful that, I don't know, you've included me, but more so included Dalton. I love that he's getting out into the world 100 years later.
I create these immersive installations in which insects are placed on the wall in patterns that mimic wallpaper and textiles. And
incredible.
yeah, so that's it in a nutshell.
Jennifer Angus, welcome to Gathertown's virtual exhibit space, where you're featured as one of 4 participating artists.
Thank you, Barrett. Coming to you today from Madison, Wisconsin, where I teach at the university, but not in entomology, in design. And I'm pleased to have my work here in the gallery, and also pleased because I think I gave you a range of images, and the ones you selected are my 3 most recent projects. So currently I am standing in front of my exhibition at the Bruce Museum, which is my largest to date. And quite frankly, it was a bit overwhelming, more than 4,000 square feet. And the show was called the Golden Hour, which people will know as that time of day where the light is so beautiful, and you take all your pictures and everything just looks idyllic. But my sense of the golden hour was where we are on this planet, of this last stage of I don't know, a fragile planet where everything is on the cusp of change. So there were 3 rooms to the exhibition, this very large space. So it was divided by. And this particular image is of what we call the Cabinet of Curiosities. And I think a lot of people think of a cabinet as being a piece of furniture, but back in the day, it was a whole room. And I have actually created several cabinets, the furniture type. And this room, I removed drawers. The central table has either 102 or 104 drawers from a cabinet that I made. And then around the wall on the shelves are drawers from a huge cabinet that's in the next room. And we can see, I think, a picture of that on the other side of the gallery. But, when you have a huge piece of furniture, people can't, unless you're Barrett, who's very tall, you cannot see up to the top. And that was frustrating to me, having filled all of those drawers, that people couldn't see the work. And so I created these shelves. And then on the wall, you see insects. These are real insects. This is their natural color. And this room took me the longest because it has the greatest variety of insects. That these are primarily cicadas, and all the insects I use are reused from exhibition to exhibition. So they have to stand up to the wear and tear of reuse. Other insects were grasshoppers, and then I use those phasmids because they're just amazing. But it took a long time when you have a great variety of insects to put up because you're going from box to box. So I think that when you see pictures, things get really flattened out and people don't understand that these are indeed real insects. So there's that to examine. There's the drawers, which within the drawers are insects that have been essentially anthropomorphized. And I've thought a lot about how do we change people's view of insects? The average person tends to think of them as annoying, potentially frightening, and a sign of dirtiness. With the exception perhaps of bees now, where we know the average person knows them to be pollinators. And so I thought about Beatrix Potter and her tale of two bad mice. And if you're unfamiliar with that story, two mice break into a dollhouse and they do what rodents do. They kind of tear it up and make a mess. And then they realize the error of their ways and they clean up and they leave tuppence as restitution. And then we go, oh, those mice are so cute. And so I thought, why can't we do that with insects? Why can't we, is it possible to create empathy by thinking of them as not living lives that are so different from our own? Because we certainly talk about bees and ants as being industrious. So within the drawers, you see them going to school or going to work. I have positioned them so that they are kind of on their hind legs. I think that that's enough of that one. So maybe we should go across the hallway because here is the other image from that show. And there's that huge cabinet that I was talking about that has 170 drawers. So, of course, in pulling out drawers, I had gaps in it. And so at the Bruce Museum, it's a combination of art and natural history. And so the curator, who was the head of natural science, his specialty is birds. So that was just fine. I said, we got to fill these gaps. And so he selected various birds to fill those gaps. And of course, birds often eat insects. And then in front of that cabinet, which you're like, oh my God, how can she be talking about the cabinet when there's this incredible scene in the foreground? And this is the animal dinner party. And this came out of my visiting kind of Victorian era museums that really have changed very little since the day they opened. So some good examples are in Dublin at the Irish Natural History Museum, which unfortunately recently closed this past summer and they're doing a major renovation. So it's going to be a while before people can visit that, but you can go to Paris and see the Natural History Museum. And when you walk in, I think you're just stunned by the amount of taxidermy of large mammals and the skeletons. And to me, with my 21st century viewpoint, I was like, the arrogance of this. And the way man has treated nature as a commodity. And so that got me thinking about the children's song, I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly. And I'm sure most people know that she inadvertently swallows a fly. And to get rid of that fly, she swallows a spider, a bird, a cat, a dog, a goat, What comes next? Cow and then a horse, something, the order, something like that. And then unsurprisingly, she dies. So in this particular case, she is a literal consumer. And so I thought it was an interesting story because it starts with a fly, so an insect. And the original version was in Wisconsin. And I went to our zoology collection on campus, and I explained the project, and I said, yeah, I'm going to be needing a bird, a cat, a dog. And the curator said, stop, go no further. Only strange people taxidermy domesticated animals. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what do you have? And of course, unsurprisingly, it was, animals found in Wisconsin. So the very first dinner party, I decided I'd like them to be invited to a dinner party. Rather than the animals being eaten, they will join a dinner party. So the first one was Wisconsin North Woods. I've since done a Florida one, a Pennsylvania one, a Utah one. And this is actually not a Connecticut animal dinner party. This is very much a Bruce Museum dinner party because that albatross on the left-hand side, the sooty albatross, is certainly not native to Connecticut. It's a Pacific bird. And so this became very specific. And then this was the first time I had used skeletons. And I decided that they would be kind of uninvited guests lurking under the table, that sort of premonition of things to come, that these lurk ghost-like. So yeah, that was the third room, and the rooms got darker in color as you went along. So maybe we'll go over to this blue slide. And go up, here we go. And if you go before March 2nd, you can see this exhibition at the Museum of Wisconsin Art in West Bend. And the show is called Into the Blue. And it's very much an immersive experience. Honestly, this is in my top 3 of installations I've created. And not only is the wall blue, and I've used cicadas that are blue. Tacina splendida is the species of cicada that's there. But as you saw in the last show, I've been lighting all my work recently with chandeliers. And so the chandeliers in this exhibition, the light bulbs are blue. So you enter this very otherworldly space. So we were just talking about Victorian microscope slides. So if we had a detail here, those bell jars that are on the shelves are, in fact, within it is always some kind of botanical matter, a Victorian microscope slide, and then there will be an insect or two gazing upon this. And for the most part, they are entomological slides. And I love those Victorian slides. They're such interesting artifacts with their gilt papers. And I think one of my favorite ones, it's labeled as being male bedbug. And so this insect, which we would consider small, is looking upon another insect. And it's a little bit, I always say, it's Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who, that remember Horton is trying to protect the dust speck because he knows there's a world upon this dust speck. So we have small insects looking at even smaller insects. And I think it's, representative of there's so much that is unseen to our human eye that perhaps if we took the time to look closer or look through a microscope, the world we would discover is quite incredible.
Jenny, I have a question. Blue with blue lighting.
Yes.
Do you become desensitized to the blue? And when you leave the room, does everything appear excessively yellow?
Uh, so there was one of the installation people is who helped primarily with installing the chandeliers, among other things, and putting up shelves. He is a lighting specialist. And I had everything blue. And I asked him, "What is your honest opinion about this?" And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I think this show is too dark." And I recognized that to be true. And he said, "I understand you want the chandeliers to be blue." So, because I had started to alternate and just let them be regular light. And he said, "Do them all blue and let me put a few gallery lights onto this." So, for whatever reason, which, I'm not a scientist, it photographs more blue than it actually is when you're there. So I don't think you certainly recognize the blue, but I don't think, as you mentioned, when you walk out, you're not sort of taken aback.
Okay.
So this is a very long and narrow space. Again, I feel constantly that photographs never do it justice and that you really have to experience the show. So this is images towards the back of the gallery, and frequently, here's an observation I have, is that a lot of people, this is not remarkable, a lot of people don't like insects. Okay, stating the obvious. But I found that they are okay with them when they are put into patterns, because it's organizing, it's controlling them. That, and if you think about it, isn't that what man has sought to do? Control nature. So they really don't like it when they are swarm-like, I'll say. Not that cicadas would ever do that, but there's a real discomfort when they take this formation. So in many of my exhibitions, I have used paper wasp nests, and then it appears like this swarm is kind of coming out of those. But for this exhibition, I use these gramophone horns, which are just, again, such beautiful objects that look flower-like, so completely appropriate. And I also think that, if these cicadas were alive, of course they would be making a sound. This exhibition does have a sound component. So at the entrance to the gallery, there is a full gramophone set up. Unfortunately, it's not playing, but we have put in a soundtrack of songs that would play from a gramophone. They have that kind of crackling sound. Of course, I have Flight of the Bumblebees, a version that would be appropriate to a gramophone, but also a lot of, the blues, which is quite appropriate. So I'm really excited about using these gramophone horns, and that was new for this exhibition. All right. So let's move along. So kind of my whole inspiration for this show really came from an experience I had this summer. I went to Malaysia and was invited to do an art intervention at the University Putra Malaysia in their zoology gallery, which they call the Zoolary. And despite the availability of insects, you can purchase insects that come from Malaysia. They're very strict. They are actually quite strict. My first thought was like, where am I going to get insects? Oh, I'll just buy them and I'll bring them. And I was told, do not do that. They will be confiscated. And then I thought, okay, I will, there are insect dealers in Malaysia. I'll just buy them in country. And when I shared some of the people, the university felt that these people were not on the up and up, and they did not want to be associated with people who are perhaps bribing, officials to look the other way. So then I was like, okay, what are we going to do? And what they produced was, probably 30 boxes of insect collections that were created by students over a period of 40 years. And the students had long graduated, and the professors who had overseen their work had since retired, and they were just sitting there, and no one was doing anything with them. And they said, be our guest. So that was incredible. What a resource. So I got to use a lot of insects that I would normally not use in my work, like moths and butterflies, because they're too delicate to stand up to the wear and tear. And normally I don't use the collection data. My insects, other than being an example of their species, don't have that really valuable collection data. And I felt very guilty because this box is showing, there it is, but a lot of the time I threw it away. And I felt super guilty about doing that, but they didn't seem to be concerned. And then my collaborator, Dr. Farida, she is a biologist, and she also is a cyanotype specialist. And for those that don't know, cyanotype is sometimes called a sunprint. Well, when you are in Malaysia, you can get the most beautiful cyanotype between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. I have done cyanotype before, but I have not been in a tropical location. And so we got the darkest blues. It was very satisfying. So these are, I was talking earlier about the cabinets of curiosity. Primarily, I have used marbled paper, but it was fun to make my own background papers for this. And the zoology gallery has beautiful wooden cabinets and drawers. And for the most part, they weren't using the drawers. And so they were free for us to use. So we had these inserts made by a local woodworker. And in total, we did 12 drawers in total. So that's one of them. Let's move along. This honestly is my most favorite one. So this was inserted into one of those drawers, and it's much more difficult to take pictures once it's in a drawer. And this was the last one I did. So I had all these materials, and I just went, I'm going to use everything I have. And so I love the foliage, that off-white color. And then I love this mantis, which is another insect that, things that are fragile, I just really don't use that often. So the mantis, and it's hard to tell, is that mantis going to catch that butterfly? Or is it like, hi, buddy? Or is it even like a kite? So this is my favorite. So it makes me really happy to see it here. And then we'll walk over here to a bell jar. So the bell jars are quite similar to the drawers of the cabinets of curiosity, which I talked about earlier, where I anthropomorphize insects. So, if you were to come to my studio, you would see as I make these that I place things. I have a very long studio table, about 16 feet. And I place things on the table. Interesting small things is what I call them. And most often they are grouped either by what they are, like, is it wooden or is it glass, or sometimes by color. So this one was definitely these jewel beetles, green, that metallic green sort of coming up to this green chicken candy holder. I'm not exactly sure. So there's not really a story. Most often they're kind of a provocative scene. And I certainly don't want to dictate to anyone what my work is about. I prefer to hear what they think. There are 3 different sizes of bell jars, and at the Into the Blue show at the Museum of Wisconsin Art, I have these, I think of them in my head as wedding cake tables, that they have 4 tiers. And so this is the largest bell jar size, which is on the bottom tier. And yeah, I think a wedding cake is very good to describe it. And so you just have all of this shiny glass with these very intriguing scenes within them. And these are not real chicks. They are, those faux kind. And there's definitely a surreal type aspect to these works. And this is sort of just coincidental of what has been chosen. Sometimes they do sort of appear to be cabinet of curiosity like. A lot of times I have miniature books in them, which are always singed, and that's a reference to climate change and our efforts to burn books where we don't like what they're saying. And so I feel like I have a chance to make a lot of commentary. I mean, ultimately, I think that this is probably going to be my last image. I would like people to go to the exhibition and come out thinking about insects differently, to think about the diversity of insects, to think about the beauty of insects. And inevitably, of course, I'm using tropical species. And that comes up, and many of them come from a rainforest. We all know how fast the rainforest is being cut down. So what can you do? But I always say, what can you do close to home? I got cited this year, and I have a studio space near Spring Green, and I got cited in May for not cutting my grass. And you can guess why I didn't cut my grass. No mow May. That's really important to insect populations. And I was like so happy that I got cited, because it gives me the opportunity to go before the village council and educate them. So I think that we can look, I can guarantee you that something in your neck of the woods is endangered because of urban, suburban sprawl, climate change, loss of habitat, pesticides. So I really see the exhibitions as a platform to have really meaningful discussions. So that's really my goal. And I think initially I started working with insects, and I really played on our fears about them. And now I'm a lot more interested in educating the public and using my exhibitions as a platform to have really important discussions.
I am so honored to introduce Elizabeth Jean Younce, number 3 of the 4 artists participating in this year's show. And I say honored from personal experience because I had the pleasure of working with Elizabeth Jean Younce as illustrator for book The Insect Epiphany, not only the cover design, but several works inside, including this on the cultural history of sericulture or silk use. So Elizabeth Jean Younce trained with MFA in University of Wisconsin-Madison in printmaking, is based in LA right now, and is not only a fine artist, but a commercial illustrator. And I'd love for you to take it away, and I'll follow you wherever you take me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, Barrett. I'm happy to be here. So on the gallery wall, there are kind of 2 different bodies of work. All of my pieces are on this green wall in the back, and The first body of work is from a solo exhibition a couple years ago, and we can kind of get into that moving from the right, far right piece of that collection. We can kind of move from right to left with this like fine art body of work. So this was from a solo exhibition at Talon Gallery in Portland, Oregon in 2021. But all of the pieces in this exhibition were created through watercolor and graphite. This first piece on the far right is called Learning to Balance. It's particularly relevant to me here in California. It features the bay checker spot butterfly, which is an endangered butterfly, only endemic to the Bay region of California. Its host plant is the dwarf plantain, and so that's the plant depicted here in this illustration. And the dwarf plantain has been dwindling in its native range. It likes disturbance, and so oftentimes it grows on the roadside, but then as a result, it is kind of being polluted due to the chemicals of growing on the roadside, also pesticides, runoff, air pollution, etc. And so as a result, the plant is dwindling, and so are the butterflies. Yeah, and so moving just kind of right to left with this exhibition, the next piece here, let's see, is actually a piece that Barrett owns, and was kind of the spark between Barrett's interest in having me work on the book, which is so exciting. And in this piece in particular, most of the pieces in this collection have an invasive plant that is taking over and disrupting this natural balance between plant and animal. And so in this case, you have the predator, which is the American badger, the prey, which is the white-sided jackrabbit, which has a very limited range. This Jerusalem cricket is kind of just succumbing to all of this mess as the invasive bufflegrass takes over. And yeah, so I'm not going to specifically talk about each individual piece necessarily, but the next one on the next wall, again, moving from right to left, has a particular place in my heart. So this was kind of the spark where I started thinking about my work a little bit more relevant to the scientific community. And, I've always had an interest in nature and art and just being outside in general, but also drawing plants and animals. But I think when I was in school, I didn't really know exactly how to, I guess, make it relevant or make it intentional and purposeful, and have like a very specific outlet for the work. And so this piece, which is titled Hanging On, again, has a very particular place in my heart because this piece is based off of the first artist residency that I held, which was at the Flathead Lake Biological Research Station, which is affiliated with the University of Montana. So I lived on Flathead Lake in a cabin there at the biostation for almost a month and got to work with the scientists and researchers there looking at stoneflies under a microscope, learning about different species of stoneflies, their larvae, their life cycles, and going out doing field work with the scientists and researchers, using a kick net in a half-frozen river in November in Montana. Like, this was all really new to me and really, really exciting. And so I fell in love with that process of like learning from the scientists and researchers and being able to then come back and make work about my findings. And so, yeah, this was like one of the first pieces that really sparked this ongoing relationship that I now have with more scientists and researchers and more environmental organizations, actively trying to do outreach, whether through volunteering or creating pieces that are relevant to scientific research. So if you have a project that you need an illustrator for, I am perpetually overbooked, but always looking to get more stuff on the dock. Currently, we're about to do a project with Cal Trout about steelhead trout in California, and the Moore Lab of ornithology here in Los Angeles wants to do a project featuring the parrots, which are, you know, not a native species to the Los Angeles area, but are critically endangered in their native range and have really taken over this city here and made a home here. So it's a place where they can continue to live. So
You also mentioned that you're starting to lay out plans, designs for a 120-foot long school mural in Pasadena.
yes, yeah. So yeah, one of the avenues that my work has taken recently, it's exciting because I feel like printmaking, which is what my degree is focused in, really translates to every type of work. And so while I'm able to work in this manner in this collection that you're seeing here with this like watercolor and graphite, kind of more fine art, I guess, I think in like stencils and I think in shapes, and printmaking is just a process of taking something from like one form to the next and moving through all these steps, working at different scales and positive and negative space. And so that's really how my brain works. And so I'm able to work in these various ways and blow things up to murals. And so actually, because of if a funny connection that you and I have, Barrett, is with a mutual friend, Tim Musso, who is a printmaking professor at La Sierra University in Riverside, California. And he is a good friend of mine who I met at a printmaking conference 10 years ago now. And he offered me my first mural gig at the university on the side of the printmaking studio. And that mural features all native California flora and fauna. And that mural has led to multiple other murals that I've done now at other elementary schools. And so, currently I am just in the very beginning stages of starting to lay out the composition for this new mural at an elementary school in Pasadena, which will again, of course, feature all native flora and fauna to the local area. It's especially pertinent right now because of the wildfires that have just taken place in Southern California and really affected and really kind of devastated the northern Pasadena and Altadena neighborhoods. And so it turns out that many of the kids at this elementary school have lost their homes. And so this project is going to be not only like educational and informative as like outreach, educating the public about native flora and fauna, but it's also going to be like a very fun collaborative effort between myself and my muralist team and the kids and the students at the school. There's a lot of really exciting projects going on right now in the city, and there's a lot of funding and money going on right now where a lot of schools are looking to like re-greenify their blacktops. And so money is being funneled like from the city or private donors to literally jackhammer up blacktop and plant in native plants, native trees, Yeah, it's incredible. Provide shade for the kids who have not had shade on blacktops in Southern California. And so these murals are a part of that process and that project. And so not only are we physically replanting native flora and fauna, but we can also depict it at a larger scale as well. And so yeah, I just sent you an email featuring like the photo collage that I'm building out, just starting this composition. But a lot of the flora and fauna in it are going to be larger than life. And I'm really focusing on native flowers, some like rare and endangered flowers. And so then, of course, simultaneously focusing on pollinators. So like the endangered Crotch's bumblebee, some little teeny weeny sweat bees, which I personally got really excited about seeing them on my native plant garden last spring. Like that's the tiniest little sweat bees on like my poppies and my desert globe mallow. And of course, the monarch butterfly, which I have native narrow leaf milkweed in my garden here. And last year we raised 9 monarchs, or the year before we raised 9 monarchs, and last year we raised 13. So I've been, and when we have them, when we have the eggs and the caterpillars, and through each instar process, through their chrysalis, I watch them meticulously, and I have like learned so much about like them shedding and just like each stage of their life cycle. So yeah, if you, Barrett, just received that email that I sent, you'll see that the monarch butterfly is going to be, I don't know, 3 feet by 4 feet or something. And there'll be a huge monarch caterpillar that's going to be like hanging upside down on a leaf of milkweed. So the kids can kind of like come underneath it, and it should be really, really fun. And we're going to blow up like this segment so you can see what the egg looks like. You know, it's teeny weeny on the underside of the narrow leaf milkweed leaf.
That's amazing.
So yeah, that's an exciting project. But yeah, that's now I'm kind of at this point of really focusing on projects like that, community outreach, very specifically, and this that piece featuring the stonefly and the American dipper from my residency on Flathead Lake was kind of really like the jumping off point for this whole new trajectory of my work. And so that residency was in 2019. And now almost 6 years later, this is really what I want to focus on. And so, yeah, a couple of the other pieces in that collection that are on the wall here, again, feature like invasives versus natives. There's the greater sage grouse that only feeds on sagebrush, and instead this cheatgrass is just taking over the landscape. And so of course, if the birds don't have anything to feed on, then their population will be in trouble. And the hairy scarab beetle there, I had some friends who were working specifically with sage grouse, and I asked them to send me photos of what that field work looked like, and the scarab beetle was amongst one of those photos. And so I included it in that piece. The next one more specifically has to do with the Africanized honeybees, which have kind of taken over Saguaro National Park. They're often referred to as like invasive hybrid killer bees because they're like extremely aggressive. The following piece has to do more with the mammals within it, where, you know, the black-footed ferret is critically endangered due to the decline in prairie dogs, because the Farm Bureau instructed farmers to kill the prairie dogs because, they're digging up and creating holes in their crops. But as a result, obviously, the black-footed ferret significantly declined because they had nothing to eat. And again, the grasshopper is kind of just there amongst this chaos and this invasive Medusa head plant that is also taking over. And I think that there is one more piece there, yeah. And so that one again is an invasive plant, the Malta star thistle, which again is taking over areas of the Southwest. This piece features the grasshopper mouse, which eats the giant hairy scorpion, and also howls at the moon. This crazy little mouse.
Really?
Yeah. He's like a miniature wolf.
That I want to hear.
Yeah, I saw it on some like Planet Earth segment or something like that. I got really excited about the little mouse and was like, we have to really highlight that somewhere. And the Sonoran bumblebee is pictured there as well. And so, yeah, sometimes in these pieces, some of these pieces, these other pieces that are coming to my mind don't always feature insects, but sometimes something that I like to portray in my work is like when we think of these invasive species taking over, you think, oh, in some ways that could be a good thing, right? Because there's potentially more food. There's just more abundance of something in the environment, right? And so I'm kind of specifically right now thinking of a lithograph that I created, which features the lesser scaup, which is a diving duck, and the endangered Delta smelt. So this is focused on the San Joaquin River Delta in Northern California. And in this lithograph, the Asian brackish water clam is like extremely abundant, and the lesser scaups dive and they eat the clams. And again, you think now there's this abundance of clams that should be good for the lives of the duck, right? But apparently the duck eating all these clams, it negatively impacts their eggs, and apparently makes them more fragile, and they crack and they break, and so they're not actually able to hatch. And so, yeah, it's an interesting conversation when we start thinking about invasives and natives and endangered species. And so that's kind of something that I've been focusing on more recently in my work. So in addition to kind of the fine art practice, the lithographs, the watercolor and graphite pieces shown here on the wall, with like the murals that Barrett brought up earlier, I also have a small business that I run, and that's kind of what pays the bills and is my livelihood. But it's also a passion. And so on the wall to the right, on the far right of that, there are 3 pieces that are screen prints that are for my small business. So yeah, the one that we're looking at now features the California tiger salamander. I'm just going to pull these up really quick so I can speak to them very specifically. Yeah, and so I've been trying to think about like unique biodiverse habitats. And so in this, thinking about vernal pools, I was part of a collaborative exhibition on wetlands. And I was, again, trying to think about like a unique sort of a wetland. And California has lost something like 90% of its wetlands and its vernal pools, which are really unique habitats. And this piece in particular, this screen print, it features the California tiger salamander, the meadowfoam miner, which is the bee that pollinates the Douglas meadowfoam flower, the harlequin calico flower, the conservancy fairy shrimp, and the Delta green ground beetle. And if you know anything about the Delta green ground beetle, it only lives in the Jackson Prairie Preserve. And so that's why this piece is hyper specific to that area. So yeah, this is just a simple little screen print trying to create like engagement over these really unique animals. But it's been cool seeing the reaction of people because I sell these screen prints, these posters, typically at like these craft fairs where other people are buying like handmade ceramic mugs and things like that. People aren't, there at these events trying to think about biology and science necessarily, but it's been really incredible to see the reactions of the public and these customers, and people will come up and say, "Oh my gosh, tiger salamander, that's my favorite animal," or "I used to catch them in my backyard," or "Wow, yeah, the Delta green ground beetle." Like people who know about these things get really, really excited about them. And so it's just been kind of fun and interesting to see like bridging the gap between those two worlds. Yeah, the San Gabriel foothills piece with the mustard background. There's the Southern California garden slender salamander in this one. Extremely tiny, hyper local. The San Bernardino ringneck snake eats the garden slender salamander. Also extremely tiny, as I'm sure many of you know. If you've seen a ringneck snake, they're just magnificent. One of the species in here that really excites me is the white-lined sphinx moth. And in my native Southern California garden here, I grow elegant clarkia, which is one of the host plants of the white-lined sphinx moth. And last year we had a bunch of big, fat, juicy white-lined sphinx moth caterpillars on the elegant clarkia, and it's all bursting up again right now this time of year, so it can bloom in approximately March. So I'm really looking forward to having a bunch more of those caterpillars. We've also got the black-tailed bumblebee and the convergent lady beetle. And the white-lined sphinx moth also pollinates the Datura wrighty, the sacred Datura, which is the plant pictured there. But yeah, this piece in particular, again, hits my heart hard because it's based off of, again, not only hikes in the San Gabriel foothills and like plants and animals that I personally observe, but then, like I said before, part of my process, kind of coming back to the drawing pad and pulling up iNaturalist and thinking about a specific trail or a specific region that I want to depict, zooming into that on iNat and seeing again what has been observed by other people in that area. So that's kind of how this composition was built out. And then the final piece on the far right there features yucca moth, Mojave yucca, the canyon bat, desert hairy scorpion, and the California ebony tarantula. So this piece kind of came about from more or less just a simple hike in Griffith Park, right in the middle of Los Angeles, right next to the Hollywood sign, like a really, really, really main trail. And my husband and I happened to be there at dusk. And as we were hiking back down from Mount Hollywood, we saw bats, and canyon bats are very popular in this area. But then I had never seen a tarantula in real life until this moment, and walking right down the middle of this incredibly popular trail was an ebony tarantula, and it was just the coolest thing. we walked, maybe 10 more minutes. There was a rattlesnake in the middle of the trail. And then on our way down, there was a scorpion and a western toad. It just kept going. And again, this is right in the middle of Griffith Park, right in the middle, city center of Los Angeles.
It's so clear and obvious how your work is inspired by, informed by a thorough natural history background that you possess. So thank you so much for sharing not only your art, but all the underpinnings, the biology that's inspired your art. Thank you,
Thank you.
Elizabeth Jean.
And I mean, I'm a novice, I do not claim to be an expert in anything, but I am, always excited and willing to learn and trying to take all the classes. And yeah, I'm so grateful for resources like INAT, and like the community of citizen scientists that exists, to kind of band together and make community outreach and community education about these subjects like that much more attainable and easier. So yeah, thanks for roping me into your world.
Well, now it's your world. And for our fourth and final participant in the RCN Insect Declines virtual gallery, we've got my mother, Karen Ann Klein. So I'm fortunate to be in her house, in her Wunderkammer, or Cabinet of Curiosity. And you'll see as we travel around her dining room, it is replete with pieces she refers to as ecological fiction. Karen Ann Klein, would you please tell us, first, thank you for being part of the exhibit. You are the one returnee artist from last year's online exhibit.
Well, I do know the person that's organizing
Might help.
might help.
Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Unlike probably the other artists that you've already talked with, my work is based less on actual science than it is on my telling a story about something that interests me, something that I've read, something that all of a sudden comes up in conversation and then needs to be dealt with. I make as many books artist books as I do drawings, and all of these become visual essays. And this is something that has been keeping me happy and active for many years now and never seems to come to an end. I've been using insect collections ever since Barrett was at Cornell, and I had access to the collection there and no time to do anything else but draw. So I drew insects, and that started my wanting to continue. And I then moved on to the University of Michigan, which was close to home, and had access to their collection. And now can use his collection in La Crosse. So I've been doing insects because they're stunningly beautiful in such multiple forms, and birds, which I've always enjoyed. And then there are stories about all of these things, and plants, and all the strange things that happen in this world in terms of literature. Stories about hands that turn into trees like Daphne, and hands that turn into rosy dawns from the Odysseus. So his travels. I did a drawing of birds with a wonderful backdrop of black and white, butterflies trying to camouflage themselves into the night sky. And when I finished that drawing, it became a drawing of birds in a movie theater, which is something I totally didn't expect. And then that led to ideas about, well, if they go to movie theaters, what else do they have? What else do they need? So I did works on their currency and their travel plans and their conversations and their private lives, which essentially became camouflage. So that's essentially the direction I've been going. And in my books, they're all visual essays, no, very rarely text. And it's all storytelling of things that interest me.
And I noticed, just because we have it right here, maybe we can point out this piece, Black Butterflies. This was the original piece. And as we enter the gallery and look at a book form of Black Butterflies, would you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, that came from reading a book called Papyrus. And one of the things that really struck me was when the war in Bosnia took place, they put blue flags all around the library, the National Library, so that it would be noticed by bombers not to hit that spot. And instead, they bombed it to bits. And the people in the city were horrified, and they tried very hard to rescue as many books as they could, but the place was completely burned to the ground. And when they were spending the next couple days looking at this, the air was filled with all of these little black shards of books, burnt up pages, and they referred to them as black butterflies. So for me, the idea of book burning and so forth is just horrific. And the diminution, the ruin of culture. So I decided to do a little piece about black butterflies. So I did, you can see in the pages, I used pages of interesting books. And I did butterflies, and then I burnt them, and then made the one piece that Barrett just showed you that's in a plastic box. But then I also did a book using these black butterflies and wonderful pieces of paper. It almost feels like soot itself.
And that was unusual for you to
Yeah.
produce something that was a political statement.
Right. Normally I keep away from that as much as I can. I don't do political work, but this is something that is so important. And the idea of burning books or stopping people from reading is just one of the things that is very frightening to me. Needs talking about.
Well, how about we go to this first layer in the gallery together?
Yeah, this is an older drawing. And it's interesting that I probably wouldn't be able to do a drawing. I wouldn't do a drawing quite like this again, because you change and you don't, and I don't actually like to repeat myself, so I continue to keep, there's definitely a thread that goes through the work that I've been doing for many years, but it's changed dramatically. And the way I draw now is not the way I drew then. But you can see within here, I've chosen to use, I love rocks. I love rocks with rings around them. I love all sorts of natural discards like old seed pods and so forth. And I love the idea that when you're in nature, you rarely see anything that's there unless your eyes are truly trained to see them. You have to go out with an entomologist in order to see how many insects and how many wonderful things there are
And I see
lurking.
this Australian phasmid and another phasmid here,
Mhm.
and a katydid.
Right, they're lurking. So it's called crypsis because it's like camouflage. Things look like sticks and they blend in. So when you get back from it, you don't really see them, which is was part of my method of doing a lot of drawing at that time. I like the idea that you could put so many things together that you didn't really see much of anything and it was more abstract. And then when you were to look at it more closely, it was the pleasure of finding things. There are butterflies there, there's a wonderful leaf insect.
Wow, this was an interesting choice. The brilliant iridescent morpho butterfly still has some camouflage components, especially
Mhm.
when the wings are closed.
Oh, this is my most recent drawing. I went down to my brother's house in Ohio, which was in the path of totality for the eclipse. And I've always been very devoted to the sky. I love seeing clouds. I love seeing the stars. I love seeing everything. I went to Belle Isle at 5 o'clock in the morning to view an eclipse of the moon once with a friend. It's very exciting to me. So to go down for the eclipse was really amazing, but I hadn't anticipated having it be as profound an experience. I don't know why it was, but when that sun was covered totally, it was hot. It was really hot. It was it was a really hot day. And yet, when that last little bit was covered, it went cold. And all of a sudden, there was this darkness down to the edge. The horizon remained sort of light and maybe with a slight orange cast to it. And so here we were in April, and the tulips were blooming. And I did not see moths coming out, but there were people that did. And so there was this only 4 minutes, but would wake up other parts of nature. So it's a combination of my interest in plants, and I've always liked drawing things that are, are having their own lifetime in the night. So I know that when it's night, you have no color, but I have chosen to make things purple and blue and black, give them more life in my drawings. And all of the moths here are from the lacrosse collection that I have access to through Barrett.
And would you mind telling us a little bit about your process?
Sure.
Oftentimes you do watercolor, color pencil, but here you add ink.
Right, this is something that's added. That's why I was saying with the earlier drawing, that has no ink in it. It's drawn in a different way than I draw now. So I couldn't really repeat what I did then. But this is a combination of watercolor, which is normally put down without painting as a watercolor. It's just a coloring of the paper, so that when you use a colored pencil, there's a little white fleck, sort of the grain of the paper shows through when you're drawing. And in order to make a solid color, you have to really wear it down. If you color it with watercolor first, that doesn't happen, and you can gently use your colored pencils over the top. So while I was drawing that, it seemed reasonable to also be using black ink, and particularly in the areas around the tulips toward the base. I used a stipple with a little micron pen to give a very soft, which would not happen. It's just it's something different than you can achieve with pencils or with watercolor. So it was very exciting to do all of that. And then around the sun, that's gold metallic paint. It's all done in little tiny dots.
So we lose a little bit through the digital representation of your work in terms of any kind of iridescent paints or gilt, like around the sun colors, correct?
Right, it just looks yellow.
Still glorious.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of many small insects. For a while, I was going on eBay and finding strange and wonderful frames. So this arrived, and it's just made out of twigs. And there was this wonderful beetle, which has a very iridescent head part. That was very beautiful. And I decided that was the perfect perfect insect to put into this frame, because its little legs look so much like twigs themselves. That was from the University of Michigan's collection. And this was another frame that I found during this period when I was looking for imaginative frames online. It takes a while to find some things, but they're there. So this one it's metal, it's copper, and it was made in Peru. And I ordered it, and it wasn't terribly expensive, but it took forever to arrive. It's definitely a folk piece because if you see the back of it, it's very crudely made with a sort of a stand in the back and a little peg to keep things together. So when it arrived, it was a surprise. I'd forgotten I'd even ordered it. And then I had to figure out what I wanted to put in it. And there was this wonderful cerambycid beetle at U of M. And I thought it just had the same sort of wacky curved stuff in its antenna.
And the flower behind?
The flower behind was happened to be a beautiful pale apricot looking poppy that was blooming in my yard. And it just seemed like the appropriate thing for the cerambycid beetle. I mean, it's a wood-boring beetle, but it could certainly have a nice time having a picnic in the flower, I thought.
Right out.
Yeah. I do like cerambycid beetles, and they have beautiful patterns on them. And those elegant shapes are it's just a marvel. So this is one of 24 small drawings that I did for a cabinet, part of a cabinet. And basically, it's another story. It's insects coming out of their natural habitat and coming into ours. And so I made 24 different drawings where the insects, all these different insects, found themselves with velvet flowers and I can't even think what else was there, but I mean there was a little thing up that was from Japan where all the little seed pods were from the lotus pods were covered with cloth. So an unnatural habitat for the insects as they were exploring where we live. We go out to see them. They came in to see us. This is part of a book that I've been working on way too long. And it's called Smallest of Birds, which is, I saw that reference to bees in a medieval reference. And I just love the idea that someone might have thought a little bee was also a little bird at some point when people didn't know what was going on out there. So this is one of the drawings that is in that series, and it was one of my favorites. It's a thistle that they are thinking about having lunch at. And the thistle had this beautiful band of lavender that I had never seen flower in quite that way. So it was such a pleasure to see that. So I surrounded it with all different kinds of things that were in bloom at that time. Eventually that will be in the book that I want to make on the observation of bees, the crazy ideas people had about them from early times, from Greek times up until the present.
Spontaneous generation from corpses, for example.
Yep.
Oh, that'll be great. I really look forward to that book.
Yeah, that was part of why I got involved with Virgil's Georgics, because the 4th chapter is all about bees coming out of rotting corpses of cow, I think.
Gotta love it.
Yeah. I'm sure there's something rational in that somewhere.
Dig deep.
Yep. This one is a part of another book that I've been working on with a good friend, Bill Harris, who's a fine poet and a very generous one because he usually does works about jazz. And I said, would you do works about insects? And he was kind enough to say yes, he would do that for me. I was interested that Linnaeus, who had a collection of butterflies that he named Butterflies and Moths, I think he had about 240. And when he named them all for Greek myths. So this is the Apollo butterfly. And so Bill wrote a poem about Apollo. And eventually I'm going to get myself together. I've done the drawings. He's done the poems. I just have to get myself together. I've done the cover for the book. What's stopping me? I need to-
A dozen other projects.
So those are all, behind them are all things that might have been blooming in Greece. I did a little bit of research to find out what you would have in the spring. And most of those are actually in my garden.
You have a Greek flower garden.
I do.
And the final one we have up here.
Oh, this is part of the story of the life of birds and insects. And I must say, I do have fun. So I thought, well, if they're going to conduct their lives, they're going to have some sort of financing going on behind them. So I did, these are their bills. And so they're equally divided between insects and birds. But the denominations seem a little bit peculiar in that you can have a $14 and a $15 bill. But I thought if I were going to be doing numbers, I should really be doing something that had a little more content rather than just a $1 bill or a $2 bill. And one of my dear friends is a mathematician. And I said, well, Ruth, what should I do with these numbers? And she said, oh, a magic square. So the magic square is sort of a marvelous concept in that if you add up the numbers on the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, they will all come out to be 34. And that's not something that most people would notice unless I told them to. But that was a fun one to do, and that's mostly micron pen. I do like doing stipple work. I like working with ink. And it gives a different, it's also something, as I say, as you go along, you just add things or subtract things from what you do. And that was a joy to work with. I enjoyed it very, very much. I liked the design elements, and it was fun to do something with design, not just the regular drawing from natural things. Although the birds and the insects are pretty close to being naturally.
Yeah, like this
Yeah.
Pepsis pompilid spider wasp here, metallic boring beetle, and your scarab. Yeah, all of these are from sources that you either tweak a bit or place in unusual contexts. Do you want to mention one of the other 10 categories that you have for you have currency?
Yeah, we have currency. Well, I also
Literature.
Yeah, we have architecture. I also have one that I like very much that's literature. And it was based on a Brazilian concept of folk art called literature de cordal. A friend of mine works with people in the northern part of Brazil that are folk artists. And they have something in their markets which I think is really admirable. You can go and you can buy a squash or a chicken, but hanging on strings in the market are little books, which are at this point quite collectible. They're small, they usually have woodcut covers, and inside for a nominal fee you get a little poem or a little song or a little story. And I thought, what a lovely idea to go shopping and buy a poem. So I thought, well, that sounds good for my insects and my birds. So the first time I tried this, I thought, well, I'm going to do what I was going to think about as being interesting for them. And it was pointed out that no, those were field guides. I should give them their opportunity to respond. So all of the books that I made, which are hanging from strings within a cabinet, are they're all in bird language and insect language. So I have little sonograms from the insects and the birds, and I also have from a book that was done in the 1920s that I own, that is still used. It's still referred to. The man did notation, musical notation of bird calls. And so when you go through the book, the little tiny books, all of the languages in the language of the birds and the insects, not mine.
What I love is every time I come home to visit my mom, a stack of fascinating new projects await and thrill me. Ma, Karen Ann Klein, thank you so much for joining this exhibit for the RCN Insecticlines.
Well, thanks for asking.
And thank you for taking time out with the interview or the tour.
Is there anything else you want to say before I go? Any question that lurks in your mind?
The typical question is, what is on the horizon except for the unfinished projects you've already mentioned?
Well, I just finished a whole set of cabinets that are little trees, and it's my sacred woods. And now I'm working on a group of books collage books about the life of birds and how they react to chairs and stairs and doors and windows. And I have too many things to even think about.
And you've explored from early 1970s watercolor, almost pure watercolor, right?
Right.
To these Winsor Newton inks, is that right?
No, I'm using just gouache paint.
And you use these inks that were fugitive?
Oh, those were Dr. Martin's dyes when they
Yeah.
were fugitive, and most of my early work, if it's exposed to light, will disappear.
And then you moved into the watercolor base with colored pencil on that. And very large scenes, still lives, but then you moved into cabinets collaboratively, books.
Yeah, the cabinets were sort of an interesting direction. I did the series that you see behind me, and I did 2 drawings that were to look like cabinet doors, and then little square drawings that were to look like pigeonholes in a cabinet, and then long, thin things that were to look like drawers. And I was going to hang them on the wall as an installation. And I have a very good friend, Dennis. And Dennis came over to see what I was doing, and he said, well, it has to be a cabinet. And I said, I can't afford to do that right now. And he said, well, it's got to be a cabinet. You can't just you can't do that. So I said, I can't afford that, Dennis. You don't understand. Well, he said, we'll exchange. We'll do that. He works in video, and he said he has long spaces of time when the computer has to do work. So he built the cabinet for me, and when that cabinet arrived and I opened the doors, I thought, oh my God, I've got shelves, I've got drawers, I've got to fill. And if it hadn't been for that, this project would not have happened.
And that's digital artist Dennis Summers.
Right.
And then the books, what was the inspiration to do art books?
When I turned 50, I thought I'd always wanted to do a book. And I thought, I'm going to get it out of my system. I'm going to do a book.
One-off.
I'm going to do a book, and that's going to stop this whole thing. And while I was doing the book, I had ideas for 2 more books. And I did one on salads. I did one on crypsis. And all these things that interest me. The interesting thing about putting this cabinet of curiosities together is that everything I've ever owned seems to have a place within this room, and I'm not young. So all the things are gathering, and I still find something in the house, and I think, oh, that belongs in the cabinet. So it's been a pleasure to have a place to express all the things that interest me. Whether anyone sees them or not, I love doing them.
And we will depart the gallery. Please visit.